Hello and welcome to the sixth and final lesson of what has been such a challenging and insightful series on the book of Job. My name's Botello, and a few months ago, my husband and I moved to the metro region, and we are so grateful to be able to be a part of the teaching ministry. I feel that this series could not have come at a more perfect time. The book of Job has always been one of my favorites, but this study has brought me to a much deeper level of understanding its purpose and being able to apply it to my own life. I'm going to share my screen really quick and we'll get started on this final lesson. Okay, so to recap on where we've come from, we in lesson 1, we saw Howard do an outline and intro to the series. We met some of the characters and themes of Job. In lesson 2, we learned about good and evil. We learned that we are not above suffering as Christians. In lesson 3, blameless and upright, we learned that our identity and about what being blameless means in our lives. Lesson 4, with friends like these, we learned about counseling others in crisis. And lesson 5, blaming God, we learned about blaming versus questioning God. And this brings us to lesson 6, which I have entitled Worth It in the End. This is about the benefits of hardships and trials. Here we go. The goal is to demonstrate how Job ultimately benefited from the hardships and trials that God allowed into his life, and to help us grow through our own suffering. In Job 36:15, it says, "Those who suffer, he, God, delivers in their suffering. He speaks to them in their affliction." Job believed this, that God speaks to us in our affliction. I think we all believe this as well, but I want to ask you, is God speaking to you right now? Are there things that you're going through where God is trying to speak with you? The most challenging part of Job's situation is that all the hardships, trials, afflictions, challenges, and suffering in his life seem to come for no reason at all. So our first point is not my fault. One of the men that at Job's side, after all this suffering occurred, expressed his thoughts in this way. In Job 36, verse 4, he said, "Be assured that my words are not false. One who has perfect knowledge is with you. God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm and is in his purpose. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their rights. He does not take his eye off the righteous. He enthrones them with kings and exalts them forever. But if people are bound in chains, held fast by cords of affliction, he tells them what they have done and that they have sinned arrogantly. He makes them listen to correction and commands them to repent of their evil." And here we see the law of retribution at work. The law of retribution basically says that the righteous are blessed and the sinners are cursed in real time as it happens. And this is truly what they believed in this time. And we know for a fact that this isn't true. We all know someone who has experienced, or we ourselves have experienced, that righteous people don't always have it easy, and evil people are not always crushed for their wrongdoing, at least not in this life. And this is, though, the belief held by Job's friends and even Job himself until this experience. In Job 30:24, we hear Job express this same kind of idea. It says, "Surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries for help in his distress. Have I not wept for those in trouble? Has my soul not grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness." And so Job has this understanding of the law of retribution. So he has a hard time wrapping his brain around this. He agrees with this idea that doing good brings good, that doing bad brings bad always. And however, he's seeing in the middle of this in his own life that this isn't true, and he's shocked by that reality. He also goes on to challenge the reason God did this. He wants to be given a chance to plead his case and believes that if God listened to him, he would see that this is wrong. And here is where he goes wrong. We understand that the rain falls on the evil and the good, right? We also understand that God disciplines like a parent. Godly discipline is not always defined as punishment. It is correction or training. In Hebrews 12, verse 6, I'm going to jump a little bit here. Hebrews 12, 6, it says, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? And in verse 11, it says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. And there are even different ways that we discipline our children, right? I have a 3-year-old little girl, and she gets disciplined a lot. The word discipline, though, doesn't necessarily mean punishment. It can be correction. It can be training. And yes, my 3-year-old does disobey. And when she does, there are consequences. She gets disciplined. We all understand this kind of discipline, even at an early age, right? And I feel right now like I'm having to dish out this type of discipline all the time, every 2 minutes, all day long, because whoever said that the terrible 2s were a thing, they were wrong. It's the terrible 3s. But we also have what we call teaching moments with our children, right? Sometimes they're serious times where we're teaching them something, but not necessarily because they did anything wrong in particular. We just want them to understand something or learn something. These are moments of discipline as well. And they're not necessarily moments of being corrected, but being taught something that's going to be important later. And similarly, there are different types of trials. It's important that we not buy into the law of retribution. We understand discipline as a consequence, but discipline as a teaching or training moment for no apparent reason is so much harder for us as humans with limited understanding. As members of Western civilization, reading Job will of course make us think of our own trials or the trials of those that we love. And so I wanted to tell you about one of mine. I've experienced several hardships in my life, as we all do. Most of the time I'd either do something wrong that caused it, or I did something the wrong way with the right intentions. And I realized that the way that I did it had caused something bad to come from it. Cause and effect type hardships. And I think these are the most common. But the last few years, I've been enduring a hardship that I did not cause. Several years ago, even as a teenager, I have had pretty serious pains and never really understood it. Doctors always said that I had benign recurring cysts and that it would go away. And the last several years, it's gotten worse and worse. But after giving birth and going through labor, I realized that some of this pain was at the level of labor pain. And I knew something was wrong at that point. I realized this isn't what everybody feels. And so I went to the hospital one day where it was particularly painful at work. And my coworkers sent me off to the hospital, and they did all kinds of tests on me. And they decided basically I needed surgery to find out what was wrong. And they did surgery. When I woke up, they told me they had taken part of my reproductive organs out, and I was pretty devastated. I went through some mourning and recovery from the surgery. And then I was diagnosed with endometriosis, a very severe case of endometriosis, and started up on the medication, which has its own problems. The medication came with quite a bit of depression, a good long year of depression, and weight gain, and didn't totally take away the pain either. It was more to slow it down. And this disease, now I'm in the living with it, because this disease doesn't have a cure. So very little is known about it at this point. And so the biggest thing you can do is eat right. And yeah, there's nothing else to it. But this isn't something that I could have caused, and there is no cure, right? I'm not being disciplined for something that I did wrong, but God is still using this for training in my life. My second point is a real know-it-all. Here we've got God, who truly knows it all, and Job, who thinks he knows it all, right? So in chapter 38, Job has just spoken, and he clearly expressed how he felt. And then God finally speaks. After 38 chapters, we finally hear God speak. And he does these two different speeches. And in verse 38, we see the beginning of it. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, 'Who is this that obscures my plan with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me.'" I don't know about you, but if I heard God say this, I would be shaking. I always think this is one of the scriptures that makes me know who God is. But here, just in the beginning, we can see what Job did wrong. God points out words without knowledge. He's speaking about things that he doesn't know. And then he goes on into his speech God does, into explaining the difference between Job and God and Job's ignorance. First, he points out Job's ignorance of inanimate creation. God is the creative force behind inanimate creation. And I love this part of Job, because God is just laying it out exactly who he is and how powerful he is and how little we are in comparison. Here he talks about the earth, the sea, time, the deep, light and darkness, snow, hail, fog, thunderstorms, dew, ice, constellations, clouds, and mists. All things that we have absolutely no control over, but he has all control over. And then he points out Job's ignorance of animate creation, if that wasn't enough. And again, he is the creative force behind animate creation. The lion, the raven, mountain goats and deer, wild donkey, wild ox, ostrich, horse, hawk, and eagle. So he is just pointing out how everything bows to God. Everything listens to God. He created it all. And the point here, the big point here is that we don't understand what God understands. Job's response to this is really not much. He pretty much just says he's not worthy to answer. And then God goes into his second speech in Job 40. And in Job 40, he's basically asking God, do you want this job? And I know I don't, right? I don't want God's job. God does it well. But that's what he's saying. And he reemphasizes that he has all the control. He demands that Job listen, and he wants an answer. And I think this is what God's wanting. He wants a response. God's looking for repentance and growth. Suffering isn't for us to just be crushed and stay there, but it has a purpose. Suffering truly has a purpose. He's the creator. He is the decision maker, and doesn't need our permission to do anything. So really, he could do it without a purpose, but he does. He's all knowing. His judgment is perfect because he wrote the rule book, but also because he sees the whole picture and we don't. And that's where, we don't understand what God understands. Just like kids, children, they can't always see the lesson we're trying to teach, or the bigger reason why we want them to learn. They see the here and now. They see the pain of the spanking or the loneliness of the timeout. And ideally, they don't repeat the behavior due to that level of understanding. It isn't until much later that they're able to see that the correction was to protect them or to teach them something or to help them function as members of society, right? They don't see that bigger picture that we see, but they just see that discipline. Just like us, all we can see is the discipline that God is handing us, but we don't understand what God understands. He's the parent here. He's much bigger than a parent, but in this analogy, it works. So who are we to question his motives or his reasoning? Something that may look like it has no purpose or reason or couldn't possibly be justified might just be beyond our capability of understanding. I do not claim to be okay with some of the pain and evil and horrible things in the world. I'm not okay with it. But I do claim to not understand enough to make any judgment about it, or other than to continue striving to live my own blameless and upright life. That's what I can see, and that's what I can focus on. In point 3 is lesson learned. Job 42, let's see there we go, 42, verse 1 through 6. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I do not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. So we finally see Job here turn it around again. He really had a short, bad moment, but it was a big one. But he tells us here, he declared that which he didn't understand, right? Where he went wrong was judging God's actions, assuming that he knew better. We can wonder why, but we don't decide what is right and wrong or good and bad. We're allowed to wonder, but we're not allowed to decide or think that we know better. That's for God to decide. And so here Job repents. With my endometriosis, I can now say that I am learning so much. I'm now at a point where I'm not asking God to take it away anymore, but I'm asking for his help to see the lessons that I can learn through it. And how do you respond to pain and suffering? Do you immediately beg for it to be taken away, or do you search for those lessons? I think that's the biggest thing that I've been learning through this is search for the lessons in the pain. There's a reason for the pain. There's a reason for what goes on. It doesn't mean it's going to go away, but you can continue to learn through it. What I've learned through endometriosis so far, here's some of them. One is that I can be self-reliant rather than God-reliant. And I'm realizing that there are moments where I just can't do it alone. I need God to get me through the day. Taking care of the temple, I've learned how to eat right. I've learned right for my body and what it needs. I've learned how to take care of myself. I thank God I no longer am in that depressive state. I've been able to change my diet and help with that. I've learned that I'm a classic codependent, and I try to do everything, even when I feel like I don't have anything left to give, and that's not okay. Only God knows the plan. I've learned that he knows the plan, that none of this was my plan. I didn't plan on anything in my life to go the way it has gone, but I've gotten to see several dreams realized in ways that I hadn't expected and planned, and other dreams that have been just changed. And it's always better when it goes God's way. Also, God has made me stronger and more resilient than I knew I could be without this pain and without the suffering that I've been through the last few years. I think I would believe myself to be much more limited. And because of it, I know that I can handle way more, and that with God, nothing is impossible. At the end of Job's story, the one thing he wanted to know from God, he never did get answered. God never revealed to him the why all this happened to him. God doesn't have to reveal the why to us oftentimes, and oftentimes he doesn't. We wouldn't even be able to wrap our brain around it sometimes, around the real why. And God wanted Job and wants us to trust him and his all-knowing, all-powerful judgment. The why is always the same in the end, displaying the glory of God. That's the final why. In conclusion, I want to read a passage from John 9. In John 9, verse 1 through 7, it says, "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned,' said Jesus, 'but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground and made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." So the man went and washed and came home seeing. One of my favorite miracles and moments with Jesus. But once again, here we see the assumption that trials and suffering must be the result of wrongdoing. And yes, this man suffered, but the reason was bigger than himself, bigger than any of the people present could have imagined. He had the privilege of allowing his transformation to display the power and glory of God. His transformation would amaze and teach people forever through the Bible. And in the same way, each of us is chosen. I get to be used by God. How he chooses to use me and what happens to me is nowhere near as important as the goal of the display of his glory. Romans 5, 3 through 4 says, "But we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. His power and glory is evident through the transformation that can only come through the trials and suffering." In this series, we've been on a journey with Job. We've learned through his suffering, we've learned that no one Christian or non-Christian is immune to suffering. We've learned what it is to live a blameless and upright life, the do's and don'ts of counseling others through suffering, what it looks like to blame God and how suffering can benefit us. Job's pain and transformation was able to glorify God in the end. He learned his lesson and he remained faithful to God. He was also blessed after, which is not guaranteed in this life, but it is guaranteed to us in heaven. His life and pain continues to glorify God as we learn from it today. In the end of my life, if it is said at the end of my life that I glorified God, that his power was evident in my transformation, if others are brought to faith through seeing how God worked in me and through my pain, then I think all of it will have been worth it. So what are you learning? And keep your mind on the fact that it will be worth it one day, that all of this pain, as long as we continue to learn, as long as we continue to grow, God's glory can be displayed through us. And yes, in the end, there will be a reward. There will be no pain. There will be no suffering. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for listening to my lesson. I hope you have a wonderful night.